And thank you for coming out to our budget meeting. We committed to having this meeting once the trustees approved a final budget, and I'll talk more about the what has brought us to this point with regards to the final budget, the approved budget, I should say. You're going to be hearing from not only myself, but of course, Terrence, our Vice President of Administration, and Pete, Tony Castro, about the divisional changes. And then we're going to leave it open at the end for, hopefully we'll have time for questions. Feel free to type your questions in the chat. DeAndre Fisher will be monitoring the chat, and we will get to as many questions as we possibly can. So we are ready to start. There's a lot of information to cover, and so we're being very considerate of your time. And Terrence, would you like to start?
I have a technical question. Are you seeing just the single? Are you seeing what you're supposed to be seeing?
Yes.
Okay, good. So you're just seeing one image.
Yes.
Great. So we have, been talking for a long time about the budget and digging out of the whole financial hole we're in. Before we get started, we're going to have Andre do the land acknowledgement.
So I'm happy to do it on behalf of DeAndre. So on behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Julius, for pasting Real Rent Duwamish in the chat.
Okay. Well, we are here. We finally have a budget for the 2021 academic year. And as many of you know, it has been a challenging time. We started with, I'm just going to do a quick recap on the process. When I started June 1st, we were in the middle of a budget process, trying to establish budgets and recognizing that several cuts needed to be made in order for us to present a balanced budget to the board. We had weekly budget meetings explaining to the college community about North's budget and what it looked like, and where we had challenges and where we had opportunities for growth. Once those meetings concluded, we began, excuse me, basically, I call it chasing numbers. We were trying to make sure to get the right numbers. There was a conversation about whether we were going to receive cuts from the state, or if the state would give us money and take money back, and all of that. So we were trying to make sure to get the right numbers. And then there was a series of back presentations for the college where the individual divisions presented their recommendations for possible cuts to accommodate the cuts that we've been required to make as a result of budget shortfalls, COVID shortfalls, and structural deficits. And that's the biggest part of all of this, the structural deficits. As you will see in the presentation today, and what you've seen in past presentations, is that we have just many moving parts. We have numerous unfilled positions, which to me reflects that there was some thought that we would probably end up where we are, and so positions were frozen before we were actually required to freeze them, by district office. And we've had to look at the functions of the different areas. We've had to deal with the impact of COVID on, facilities and cleaning and you know, the child care center, food services, and all of that. So there's been a lot going on during this time, the fall quarter beginning. Again, us trying to move to an approved budget, which was extended twice, I believe. We finally, this past week, or this November, received the okay from the trustees for a finalized budget. That's great, but part of the problem is that we are almost halfway through the year. And so once again, the numbers shift, because what we anticipated during summer obviously would be different, because we have had a few more months in, and that means a few more months of expenses. Also recall during the summer, we talked to you all about the fact that we had to stop the hemorrhaging, if you will, of North. We had to cut back because our reserves would not last very long. This year, all of the colleges have balanced their budgets with reserves. We just simply cannot have another cycle of that. The college will not sustain with that scenario. And so what you're seeing today is our first, or actually technically our second swipe at trying to slow down the hemorrhaging, if you will. And we will have to have discussions once the new year begins on other things that need to happen. And you'll see in the numbers presentation that we have additional cuts that need to be made. And we've always said that, but this is our first attempt at, again, just slowing things down so that we can ascertain what we need to do moving forward so that North can be sustained, and at the same time we can support students. This does not include the conversation about what happens when we return to face-to-face instruction and students being back on campus. We're not there yet, but we will have that conversation with the college community. Recognize that there are some personnel actions that have already been taken across the district. Those are in flux, meaning, you know, it's change and they're not settled as of yet, but all individuals affected by the budget cuts across the district have been notified. So the next step in all of this is that we need to look at how North is structured, look at our budget, look at how North is structured, and talk with the college community, which is you, about what's best moving forward in light of a few things. We have CTC Link implementation coming up in February that will affect how we do business. So we have a new budget, we have CTC Link, which is affecting how we do business. And then, as you all know, we have a district-wide conversation that the trustees have asked us to engage in with regards to possible single accreditation or continued confederation. And I'll answer any questions I can about that once we get to our Q&A. So in all of this, the expectation is that by spring quarter, we will have some semblance of what North will look like, or should look like, with the budget cuts, with possible additional confederation, with CTC Link and all of the above. Rest assured that all of this, you will all get an opportunity to share your views, make recommendations throughout the next few months. And we're going to put a process in place similar to this one, to where a baseline vision is shared, and then you get a couple weeks to share anything that you want, say anything you want about the recommendations. And so we're going to break that up by division so that there's ample time for consideration. So know that we have every interest in being transparent. There's nothing going on in the background. I honestly wish I could say there's wheeling and dealing, but we don't have anything to wheel and deal with. What you see here is what we have. And we are going to continue to be transparent and continue to answer your questions as best as we can. So with that, make additional comments later on. I'm going to go ahead and let Terrence go into the financials of our presentation.
Okay, well, really, this budget process is something that we gave to the Budget Advisory Committee to really do a lot of heavy lifting. And there was a lot of uncertainty about just what's happening with state funding, et cetera. So the Budget Advisory Committee was asked to look at 3 different scenarios: 15% reduction, a 20% reduction, and a 25% reduction in expenses in order to balance the budget. Those are 3 different scenarios. And they made some recommendations to the executive team, which I will summarize as: first, to take a phased approach. In other words, not try to do everything at once, but to take a phased approach starting at the 15% expense reduction level. The other thing they emphasized is that we needed to apply an equity lens to cuts, that there should not be, if it could possibly be avoided, disproportionate effects on BIPOC and people lower down on the compensation scale. And finally, they recommended that we fund deferred maintenance, which we have a huge amount of deferred maintenance, from reserves. The overall budget situation, you may recall from the beginning of the summer, we were looking at a $6.5 to $10.25 million deficit. Now, it's a pretty broad range. And the reason the range was so broad is because there was so much uncertainty about the level of state funding we would receive given the shutdown of the economy. Now, against that deficit, we had reserves, or the North Seattle College has reserves of $14 million to sort of work with. The recommendations that were made by the Budget Advisory Committee, and then sort of tweaked a little bit by the executive team and the president, and then ultimately approved by the Board of Trustees, resulted in a $5.1 million deficit for this year. Now, that's assuming the state funding gets reduced by 10%, because that's a district gave us that assumption to work with. And it also includes, half a year of expenses that we're incurring this year because we didn't make decisions earlier on. So that draws our reserves down to $8.9 million. So that's sort of like what we have fuel left in the tank, so to speak, to work with. So how do we get there? How do we get down to a $5.1 million deficit, even with a 10% reduction in state funding? Well, the first thing was the district recharges us for expenses. And so those expenses are things like technology support, the chancellor's office, guided pathways support, institutional research support, that type of thing. So they reduced their budget by approximately $500,000. Goods and services, equipment, and travel, we were able to reduce those by $679,000. The big chunks were, there was a large sort of discretionary funding pot within the president's office, and food services goods were a big chunk of that number. Then management compensation, compared to the past and compared to sort of budget planning, is reduced by $155,000. That came from 2 places that were sort of a combination of voluntary and, for want of a better word, policy changes. So the executive team, depending on the position, people in the executive team, their compensation relative to previous and to budget was down 8 to 35%. So that added up to almost $130,000. And at the dean's level, several deans voluntarily took 5% reductions, and that added up to about $30,000. So those are sort of the big, kind of chunks. But the biggest chunk, of course, is our biggest cost, which is employees. And this graphic here represents the 400 plus FTE, employee FTE, that we have at North Seattle that was originally budgeted. And what you'll see here is we had to look at all different parts of the college to see where we might find opportunities to reduce expenses associated with employees, because again, that's over 80% of our overall cost. So this is sort of a checkerboard. In total, you're looking at 70 some positions. When I say positions, I'm talking about full-time equivalent positions. So there can be 3 associate faculty can equal 1 full-time equivalent. So it's kind of a tricky, it's not like an exact science, so to speak. When we approached this whole thing, we were trying to look at it in how do we do the least harm? You know, what can we do so it's least impactful? And there's a lot of people, right? I mean, there's a lot of positions. And at the same time, as Dr. Crawford mentioned, quite a few of them were vacant. So a lot of vacancies, so nobody was displaced as a result of those. The other thing is there was a early retirement program, so-called VESI, and quite a few people took advantage of that as well. The other thing is that through the collective bargaining agreements we have, employees members of the union have bumping rights. They have a right to either vacant positions or positions that they have held earlier, which they have, seniority rights too. And so we were able to give bumping right opportunities to a number of employees as well. So this doesn't, it's not a great thing, because the fact is, in most cases, those employees were negatively impacted in the sense that their shift changed, and so it's not as convenient for them, or their compensation levels were actually negatively impacted. Nonetheless, they're able to continue with us, continue contributing, continue to receive health benefits. Those are all, what they are, leaving this many positions, of which, unfortunately, permanent job loss, as indicated, no other sort of options, just people lost their positions. A number of these occurred in the summer already. You'd heard the announcements about food services, childcare, event services, or events and rentals, should I say. And there were a few others as well. There's some going forward. The ones that were communicated last week, they're going to take effect January 15th. So people who lost those positions are effectively receiving, they're receiving about a 60-day severance. So this leaves these other blue squares, and they represent associate faculty, part-time faculty. So it's quite a few FTE, and truth is, it's even more people affected. Now, the thing is, how did we sort of come up with this number? Well, it all relates to what faculty are here to do. They're here to teach students. And historically, for every faculty member teaches about 21 to 22 students. It's gone up and down a little in that range. So that's what they call the student-faculty ratio. You may recall from earlier times that our student FTE, the students that we are here to teach and to educate, has been going down steadily. And when we budgeted for 2021, we were informed that basically international student enrollments are down about 45%. We saw our fall numbers down for state students about 5%, and Running Start was about flat. So our enrollment has continued to decline, and so If you look at the student faculty ratio historically, you'll see that it's 21 plus generally. Last year it was just a smidge under 20. We didn't adjust, that much. So the budget is based on, the student faculty ratio of about 21. And as you can see, that's very much in line, shall we say, with history, a little below 16 through 19, a little above 19 through 21. The result is, whoops, did I miss something here? Yeah, so the result is this reduction in faculty FTE that you saw on the earlier slide. So if you look at this by division, shall we say, you see this reductions in force. Most of the instructional reductions are, part-time faculty positions and so on. It's a much smaller area, of course. Student service is much smaller, but there are quite a few positions affected there as well. A good chunk of these are childcare, which we don't know, but we hope to be able to reopen that. Administrative services, pretty sizable reductions there as well. And then the president's division is really the smallest unit, and there are 2 positions being eliminated there as well. If you think of it in terms of the structurally, faculty versus exempt versus classified, these are sort of, this is sort of the relative picture of how many positions were in each FTE positions, right? In each category, and the anticipated reduction through the budget process. So as you can see, the largest number of employees by FTE are faculty by a significant amount. As a percentage, it's the smallest reduction. Then exempt and classified, exempt is the smallest number of people, and then classified is the next largest. Basically, the percentage of classified positions eliminated is a little bit larger than the percentage of exempt positions eliminated. And as I said, the faculty is the smallest percentage, as a percentage basis. So what's next? Dr. Crawford talked about the situation that we are not done yet. So is our glass half empty or half full? There's still just a tremendous amount of uncertainty right now. For one, we don't know what's happening with state funding. In the short term, what we're actually hearing is not the sort of half empty part of the glass. We're actually beginning to hear sounds like, hey, you know what? You might not take a cut this year at all, but you should expect a cut in next year. The COVID funding has been significant help to us, and that, of course, is sunsetting. But on the other hand, you never know. Congress might get its act together and help us out. International, though, the international outlook is really very much on the half-empty side, and that's for 2 reasons. One is it's going to take time for our country's reputation to recover. It just is. But the other thing is that there's a shift taking place where intensive English programs are being centralized at Central Seattle College. So what does that mean? Intensive English programs are the feeder into our college international classes. So if those are all centralized at Seattle Central, those students in all likelihood are just going to continue at Seattle Central. There may be a handful who come to North for a particular program, but chances are the vast majority of them are going to stay at Seattle Central. So that's probably just going to get kind of worse, as it were. But the vaccine is certainly, when I say the vaccine, there are several vaccines. So that's, we'll see us, I think, in a much better place. The opening of light rail is going to make it more convenient for people to come to school here, and hopefully that will have a positive effect on our enrollment. As I said, federal recovery funds may be forthcoming. Just don't know. It's a political matter. And this next one is a bit perverse, but one thing that's for certain is there's going to be a high rate of unemployment going forward, initially at least. And for us, that translates into higher levels of enrollment. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. Hopefully the glass is indeed half full, not half empty. But this is the sort of situation we're in. We are still burning through money. We're running, you know, I estimate the annual deficit right now at $1 to $3 million, depending on, in the sort of steady state, as it were, depending on, you know, state funding levels and that type of thing. We've got about $9 million, or at the end of this year, we'll have about $9 million left in reserves. So, and some of those reserves need to be used on deferred maintenance. So, you know, we're still in a sort of a critical situation. You may recall that from earlier presentations, I pretty much concluded with, this is bigger than North, right? This is bigger than North. And that remains a true statement. And what we've done thus far is sort of what North could make decisions on and North could do. And while we are doing some reorganization, we're not really making what I'll call deep structural changes. But the fact is that one of the things the unions talk about is administrative expenses and administrative costs, and that those need to be looked at real hard. And they're right. They're right, and that is something that needs to be looked at holistically at the district level. The relationship between the district and the colleges has to be revisited and looked at and sorted out, and we need to see how we can gain some real administrative efficiencies. So the board is very focused on this and has given the chancellor some goals relating to that. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Crawford, because she's been, you know, involved in this, and she can speak more fully to the chancellor's goals and how they relate to the budget here.
Great, thank you, Terrence. So we talked about the what's next of it all, and the fact that we now have an approved budget and that we're continuing to evaluate. Well, something that's running alongside all of this is, go back one more, Terrence.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Are the chancellor's goals. As part of his evaluation, the trustees gave the chancellor specific goals that they would like for him to achieve / pursue in the coming 2 or 3 years. And we are placing emphasis on 2 that will affect our budget. And it speaks to what Terrence mentions about the fact that this structural deficit piece is bigger than North. The chancellor has been asked to develop and implement a long-term sustainability plan. Well, you'll be happy to hear that a part of that is for Choi Holloway, our new vice chancellor of basically administration / finance, is to integrate the budget process. Each college budgets differently. And so as you look through the district presentation, you'll notice that there are some blocks filled for some colleges and not for others. And that has to do with how we budget and how we define the way we budget and the different budget components. Well, Choi is working to clean all of that up so that we're consistent and our budget is more, I'm just going to say, understandable. And for you English folk out there, I know that's a bad word to use, but you know, that in a nutshell, right now, we just simply cannot apply one methodology to all 3 budgets. It's just not clean enough. CTC Link will help with that. We have to look at the administrative structure. They have made that very clear. We are not married to the current administrative structure. The board has made it clear that they want that looked at. So we're trying to do so methodically. And you'll hear more about that particular piece. Academic program reviews, for those of you involved in accreditation, you know that that is something that is expected. We are supposed to conduct program review to make sure that the programs we're offering are viable and can provide a living wage for our students. And so that is something that they have asked the chancellor to focus on and put more emphasis on. And that is a very inclusive process. And so if you are asked to participate in anything that's developed, I encourage you to do so. Again, aligning support services, looking at the services we offer, the outward facing services we offer, and align them so that they are, and here's that word again, more understandable for our students. We confuse our students and we have different processes. And just because we are independently accredited does not mean that we have to have certain processes as an individual process. So that's something that's being looked at as well. And the names that you see in the columns represent individuals who have been assigned to work with the chancellor on these particular objectives. And then of course, 4E, switch over to CTC Link. We are all deep in CTC Link and we'll probably be very glad when February gets here so that we can move on and get on with the business of the district. And then you will notice in number 5 that the trustees would like him to complete a feasibility study or assessment of achieving single accreditation. Now, I have to be clear here that it does not mean that they have said we're going that direction. There are 2 things that will happen before the trustees make this decision. In January, the chancellor and I will make a presentation to the board about accreditation in general. It's just general information on accreditation, making sure they're all on a level playing field and have a basic understanding of accreditation. And then in May, they have asked us to do a pros and cons presentation. What are the pros and cons of Seattle colleges becoming one? And that is something that will require lots of data being collected, hearing from all of you, and sharing that information with the trustees. And of course, looking at the fiscal aspects of it, as well as the programmatic aspects of it. So recognize it is not a done deal. The reason I'm involved in it is because I don't know if you all are aware, but every president has a second thing that they do, or a second job with regards to their function within the district. So as an example, Rosie deals with EDI. That is her secondary function as a president. And mine had yet to be announced when I was hired. And so it has been announced that I'm working with the chancellor on this feasibility assessment. And I'm sure that comes from past history. Many of you know I just left Dallas Community College District and worked with them to become Dallas College, one huge campus, one huge college. And so the pros and cons assessment will be very eye-opening for all of us. And so we're not to the point yet where those of you involved in accreditation would be involved. And I know there's been some concern about that. We are not even to that point. So recognize that there is a lot of sharing and vetting that has to happen first. And then when the board decides, yeah, we've heard pros and cons. We've spoken to experts. The chancellor and I have been meeting with accrediting entities across the country, and we're going to present the facts, pros and cons, and then the trustees will make a decision. It is my understanding that they have talked about this on and off for several years, and now it's time for them to vote. But you will absolutely get an opportunity to share your concerns. One thing that we were asked to do is avoid including or implicating anything that has to do with the college community until CTC Link has launched. So after CTC Link has launched, you will have several opportunities to attend forums and have conversations about any information that has been gathered and that will be shared as part of the pros and cons. So rest assured, despite rumors, it is not a done deal. And we're just going to present the facts. I shared with the trustees at the last meeting that there are additional confederations that can happen, which would mean that maybe we don't go single accreditation. There are additional things that we can do to be more effective and efficient in this district, and it may not warrant that. And our accrediting agency, our accrediting body, Northwest, has suggested that we do everything we can to move even more into a confederated model before the trustees make a decision on whether or not to go single accreditation. Also recognize that Northwest is learning from other accrediting bodies about this, because it is, I won't say it's undiscovered country for them, but it's just not something that happens frequently in Northwest's territories. And so they're looking to Maine, they're looking to Connecticut, they're looking to Alaska, they're looking to, you know, SACS, which is the Southern accrediting body, to learn about how, if a college or system wants to do this, how it's done. So we are just in learning and discovery phase. So I know you're hearing rumors, but just recognize that that is where we are. The trustees haven't made a decision either way, but I do think that they are going to make one in June, and then we will move forward from there. In the meantime, our structural issues here at North have to be resolved based on our budget cuts and COVID function and all of that. And so the structure that we move to, and we're going to remind you of this every time we have this conversation, the structure we're moving to will have to be one that will fit into a more confederated model or a singly accredited model. So there has to be a balance in all of this, and we're going to achieve that. We can't leave the gaps. Students will recognize the gaps, and we are still held accountable for student success. So again, it sounds like there's a lot going on, because there is a lot going on, but it's so important that you all be engaged and ask questions. We don't take it personally. If we don't know the answers, we will go find the answers, but we need to do the right thing for the college. So Terrence, that was my rant / spiel.
Well, that was very informative. And Pete is going to talk about instruction and how things are impacted and how they got there in instruction. So Pete, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Terrence. Pete, before you go on, can I just give an update on the chat for those who are listening by phone really quickly? Questions that may be concerning are just wanting us to know, and we'll address these at the end. Interested in to know additional cuts for North with the latest district cuts, if there's the departments affected and the departments are giving update. We heard that there are 3 to 5 security guards being let go. Is that true? That'll be updated. Nicole's question was addressed. Melissa made a comment centering childcare, and then also wanted to bring up Jim's question that maybe was concerning about yours earlier, that really talked about the SDC ratio of administrators to 1 to 6. And then the problem about food trucks, that was already addressed. And then the single accreditation is a huge issue, and those will be addressed. Nothing to be addressed, just wanted to make sure people knew that was on the phone. Thank you, Pete.
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning to everybody. I miss you all. I have been on campus a couple times as a site supervisor, and it's a lonely place. So I look forward to when we can all return. I'm going to be brief with my comments, recognizing time and that there are a lot of questions. So in a nutshell, with instruction, we'll continue to do what we undertook in the summer, with better timing now, obviously with more faculty back, more opportunity for input and feedback, as we review and assess both the organizational structure of all of the instruction and instructional support divisions, and also all instructional offerings. And I include in my slide here some of the measures that we'll use and do use for the instructional offerings and programs. I do want to point out, because I know for faculty, this is particularly sensitive, the use of the term program review in the board goals for the chancellor does not necessarily refer to the faculty-led program review processes. They're looking more for the data that we get in the program viability processes, as we're still committed to not using the program review processes against the programs. We really want the faculty to feel like they can participate 100% in those without fear of retribution. Lastly, we are expanding our partnership with EDI and the Inclusion Office to continue to improve our efforts in advancing the larger goals of the college and district strategic plans around student success, and in particular, disaggregated student success. So conversations will be happening at the broad instructional level and at the division and department and program levels for both instruction and instructional support areas. And I think I turn it to Tony.
Wrong, you turn it to Terrence.
I turn it to Terrence.
So administrative services consists of a few different areas, and we're seeing a 21 FTE reduction. All of you know that food services is closed. One thing looking ahead, we're probably going to not see cooked food anymore from whether it's a vendor or we bring things back in-house. It's probably more of a grab and go model, more of a convenience store. You get prepackaged food. The district is looking at issuing an RFP, inviting third parties to propose, operating a food service on campus. I'll give you my editorial opinion, which is that they probably won't get a viable response. And if they don't, there's every reason that we should be able to operate a food service, not as we have before with making our own food, because that's you just can't possibly. I mean, you just always have to subsidize it massively. But we're going to go forward with that somehow. Events and rentals, there are no staff because there are no events at the moment, but once COVID recedes, shall we say, instead of having 2 people in that department, we'll have 1. Administrative services / the business office. We, as you know, are operating with a number of interim people in the offices right now. And I'll just say that it's in transition with an uncertain outcome. And that is because of what Shameen was talking about earlier, this entire review of confederation, consolidation, single accreditation, and so on. How we organize those functions is going to be dependent on the larger district conversation. Campus safety and security, I think Andre raised a question about that. We are having a reduction on this campus of 1 FTE. And what that is going to mean is a reduced security presence. We haven't quite settled on how that's going to be impacted. So there are a few different ways. We can either not have somebody on the overnight shift, which poses some risks. We can reduce the pairing time overlap during the daytime, which has its risks, or we can reduce our weekend presence. So they all have their risks, and we're trying to sort through which way to go. But we're just talking about 1 out of 6 full-time people, not 5 or 6. Facilities and capital projects, I think the bottom line with this FTE reduction is our current practices cannot be sustained. If you were able to join in on some of the earlier budget presentations, you would know that our custodial staff is right, the amount of square footage, 45,000 square feet each, that each custodian has to cover is at the very edge of manageable. Arguably, it's beyond the edge, but it's still within the standards. And the maintenance situation is very similar. So I want to talk about what we're going to have to change and how that's going to impact you. So we're talking about 9 fewer FTE in facilities. Right now, our custodial team, when they try to take care of the campus, they're trying to take care of everything. They're taking care of the classrooms, public spaces, your offices, everything. Everything means they're vacuuming every space, they're emptying garbage in every room, they're doing all of that. And they simply cannot do it anymore. They're going to need to shift with fewer hours, fewer people, to focusing their energies on the public spaces. In other words, the classrooms and the spaces that students see and experience along their educational journey. That's another way of saying not the back of house, not our offices. So the impact on you is there's going to be less support and more self-help. Well, what does that, translate into? What it means is instead of the custodians coming through and emptying every single office's trash and recycling and so on, we're going to be setting up areas with central collection of trash and recycling. So if you have a work area, sort of a common work area for your division, we're going to be situating sort of a larger collection bins and so on there. And you will be expected, when your can gets full, you'll be taking it over there and emptying it. Because the custodians just cannot keep up the public spaces at this staffing level without you helping out that way. So that's an example. Another example is, it's not done every day, but your office, the floors and stuff get vacuumed and so on. We'll still work towards doing that on a quarterly basis, but you can't expect the custodial staff to do it any more often than that. So we will be positioning vacuum cleaners in these sort of divisional areas that you can check out if you have your hole puncher and you open it up and all the confetti falls on the floor and you need that vacuumed up, well, you just grab the vacuum and take care of it yourself. There's a lot of logistics that goes on with this. And so the only silver lining I can see to COVID is that it's going to give us a bunch of time to consult with all of you in different ways to set this up in the smoothest way possible. But it is definitely going to be a change because custodial staff just doesn't have the capacity. So similar situation with the maintenance team. Right now, they attempt to respond to requests, sort of a reactive orientation. Now, not like an instantaneous response, but the fact is, as things come up generated by areas, that interrupts the regular rhythm of operations, and it's not very efficient. So maintenance is going to move to what they call a preventative maintenance orientation. What does that mean? That means the focus is going to be not on responding to immediate issues, which are generally there because we haven't done preventative maintenance in the past, but it's going to be making sure air filters get changed out on a regular schedule, that various things get checked and maintained and so on, so we don't have as many breakdowns. It's going to take a while to get there because you've got to go from a place where things are kind of on the edge to where things are well maintained. But that's a change we're going to have to make because reacting and responding to sort of emergencies is incredibly inefficient and we cannot afford it. So what is the impact on you? Well, there's going to be continued support for those who plan ahead, but not so much for those who don't. there are any number of small things that maintenance staff are asked to do that go with, hey, we got some new equipment in, or we need a little modification done to this area. And as long as that's planned ahead, you know, in a holistic, complete way, so we can plan and anticipate and schedule and make sure all the ducks are in a row, we'll be able to do that and have it come together smoothly. On the other hand, if that's not happening, the maintenance staff is not going to prioritize things which are not well planned. And department budgets are going to need to cover what I'll call wants and avoidable emergencies. So what's a want? A want is something that isn't core to having, you know, a good learning space for students. You know, it's personal preference based as opposed to based on the standards that we're trying to have throughout the college. And an avoidable emergency is simply something where, you know, if it had been planned ahead, it would have been not a problem, wouldn't have taken rescheduling. But because it wasn't planned for, you know, things got out of whack. So that's going to be a change. So I'll turn it over to Tony now.
Thank you, Terrence. Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you, North colleagues, and I want to wish you all a very happy and safe holiday season. As we look to our budget challenges, I want to begin by thanking the Student Services Administrative Team for their tireless efforts and the care and the respect that they showed over the last several months, and some very grueling budget deliberations and tough times, but we're making it through, so thank you. As we approached our work, we of course did an analysis and review on the budget structural issues, declining enrollment, COVID-19 that resulted in reduced workload in some of our areas. We then did an analysis on our overall student services division budget and approached it by looking at the various complex funding sources that fund the majority of the staff who work in the student services division. Those funding sources include self-support, such as late enrollment fees or services and activities, S&A, grants and contracts. Some examples of grants and contracts would be Running Start and international programs. And then, of course, state operating dollars that have been declining over the last several years. In our initial review and recognizing that we were looking at between 15%, 20 and 25% reductions, it was really clear to us that a reduction in force, this necessitated a reduction in our workforce. And so we looked first at how COVID had impacted our operations. And unfortunately, this resulted in the temporary closures of our Roy Flores Wellness Center and our Child Care Center. And I do want to emphasize the temporary closure. We have all intentions of reopening both of these centers, and we're in the process of developing business plans and safe return to work. So thank you for that question, my friend Melissa Grinley. Next, as Dr. Crawford outlined, we in Student Services froze our positions prior to getting district directives on this, recognizing that we were going to move through some serious budget deficits and constraints. So there were 6 to 7 positions that were frozen, and it's important for me to share that these positions range from directors, program coordinators, advisors, and specialist positions. And there is no intention on replacing those positions anytime soon. The next is we had to look at the consolidation of self-support programs in our division. There are a number of self-support programs, which means that we rely on revenue to support the operations. Testing Center is an example. In the 18-19 academic year, the testing center, because we're a proctoring site, drew approximately $60,000 in revenue over the course of 3 or 4 quarters. Of course, we can no longer function in that role with our contractors in COVID. So there has been a significant reduction in the self-support operation of testing is one example. The Child Care Center is also a self-support operation. So with that, it resulted in 14 positions, which included vacant positions and positions that there was a reduction in workload and departments that will need to be consolidated over time. So where are we now? We're in the process of exploring and designing in what we're referring to as reimagining a more efficient way of doing business through cross-training of staff and partnering more closely with departments and breaking down siloed departments, if you will, and looking at a one-stop entry and funding services to provide more equitable access through onboarding, advising, support services, and student engagement. Through our research, looking at national research on guided pathways, we recognize that this is a more culturally responsive approach to working with our students. In closing, I want to let everybody know that Student Services remains committed to working with faculty and instruction, EDI, and our administration colleagues such as cashiering and the bookstore to help our students get on the path, to help them stay on the path, and to help them get to the finish line. So again, I want to thank everybody who's been a part of our budget deliberation process and thank our partners across the campus for being a part of this journey with us. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Tony, and Dr. Crawford.
Yeah, first of all, I want to recognize the comments in the chat. These are just wonderful comments and questions, and we may run over, but I really want us to take time to begin the discussion on some of these because they're fabulous questions. The President's unit, of course, has minimal reduction simply because it is a very small unit. And there were vacancies, and we are simply not filling those vacancies. We're using a shared approach for support. So as an example, you all are aware, I have an executive assistant and there's an administrative assistant in the president's office. While in light of some of the VESI changes, we are not going to rehire those assistant positions. We are all sharing assistants. So we are working on a shared approach for support. So that these individuals are not just supporting the President's unit, but supporting all of the units within the college. And so we're working on what that looks like and how that will work. Again, we've eliminated vacant positions. These have been vacant for a year or more, and we're not planning to fill those. Some of you may notice that EDI is looking as though it's hiring and growing, but that is due to grant support and our obligations for grants. And that's the future pretty much in that we're gonna rely heavily on grant support. We have one grant writer and bless her heart, she's out there writing and discovering, and we're entering into partnerships such as the LSAP grant with other colleges to make sure that we can continue to support our students. And then institutional research is a very, very small unit, and they are now being shared district-wide. So you all are aware that the district office IR person passed away a few months ago, and they are not refilling that position, and they're using all of the IR staff across the district to meet the needs of the entire district. And so they're spread a little thin, but they're not filling positions. And I didn't eliminate any positions in that area because North needs to be supported, but then they're also supporting the entire district.
So that pretty much concludes the presentation part. Before we move on to questions, I just want to say something that I think is true for all of us on the executive team, and frankly for everyone on this call, which is to just acknowledge and recognize that this is a really difficult time, and in general, and that this whole budget process has made it even more difficult. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate, at least the spirit of North, the spirit of collaboration and cooperation and mutual support that people have. I admire the willingness of people who have been involved in thinking through and figuring out how to adapt to our reduced financial capacity, and trying to figure out how to continue to serve students well in that time. And you know, perhaps most of all, I really appreciate the grace and the commitment of our colleagues who are no longer going to be with us, right? I mean, it's a pretty big deal. Many people have worked for North for years and years, decades, and have been thoroughly committed. And this is it's just a very hard thing. But every single person whose position has been eliminated that we've spoken to has really been gracious, and I think that it's just really a sad thing that we're having to go through. And I think we all wish them the best, and you know, they will be with us till, you know, January 15th, and they will choose, you know, whether they want to share their plans or what's going on.
Right.
They'll make that decision. But if they do choose to share, you know that they will appreciate their contribution being recognized. So
Absolutely.
with that, as Dr. Crawford said, there are a lot of questions in the chat, and I don't know who wants to be the master of ceremonies. I haven't looked at any of them. So.
Well, DeAndre is going to lead us through some of the questions. He's been sorting through the chat. So DeAndre, you want to take it from, I can't see you. Oh, there you are. Okay. You want to take it?
Absolutely. So just realizing that a lot have been going on in the chat. Many have been answered. So I'll just go through more say for the last possible ones. Pete and the president was able to address and answer some of the questions that centered what we earlier talked about. Terrence answered questions centering security, office, food service, and sustainability. The last question that I want to bring up, and maybe Cristobal, you want to jump on because you sent something in the chat. If you want to just go ahead and unmute and then just come on and answer that, ask that question that you had. And then Joel, you'll be next.
Great, thank you, DeAndre. Yeah, my question was kind of going to what I asked earlier, Dr. Crawford, about the leadership and bringing together the leadership. And I was just wondering, in the language that you brought in from the Board of Trustees, I was wondering if in your experience or in the conversations that you've had, that actually would allow for really not just right sizing. Right sizing, I always think people start kind of centralizing and bringing power into more and less hands. But thinking of a structure that would actually be an E-team at the district level that is composed of the leadership at the colleges and a rotating structure of who leads that E-team between the presidents, between the colleges, and actually eliminating the chancellor's office and integrating the support services that the district has. Not so much integrating leadership, but the support structure and using the great leaders we already have at the college level to guide that work.
You know, Cristobal, I'm glad you asked that question, because one thing that I think we don't realize in the current accreditation environment is that when you do something like this, if you pursue a single accreditation, you design it based on your college resources. So as an example, in Dallas, we consolidated 7 independently accredited colleges to create a college of anywhere between 80 and 100,000 persons, okay? The chancellor and my then boss, the executive vice chancellor, met with the accrediting body, and the accrediting body basically told them, you know the guidelines, you know the parameters, you know what you have to have for a college. You tell us how you are going to be arranged. And so that is when all of the listening sessions began, and we began having conversations. What should Dallas College look like? So your accrediting body is not going to tell you how to design yourself. So my point in saying this, Cristobal, is that when we do these listening sessions, you need to bring this up. You need to say, hey, how about this structure? Because that will be our role. Northwest wants to hear, if we go this direction, you know, what do you intend for Seattle colleges to look like? They're going to check the boxes to make sure we're meeting the basics of accreditation. And then they're going to look at the structure, and they can't step in and say, well, this structure makes no sense. Okay, well, as long as we've met the conditions of accreditation, you know, they can't say that. So as an example, and again, I go back to Dallas because they are still in the process of their single accreditation piece. It wasn't about the finances with them. It was about student facing services and function and swirlers. Years before this single accreditation piece took place, we began confederating, which is what Northwest has recommended we look at even more in Seattle colleges, confederating processes like the student experience. Just because we're independently accredited doesn't mean that the student has to have 3 different admission experiences, 3 different testing experiences, 3 different financial aid experiences. And so we began confederating a lot of that long before Dallas went to single accreditation. It wasn't about the financials. If you pull the prospectus, and I don't know if it's public yet, you'll see it wasn't about that. They had $1.2 billion in a bond to back them up. But it was truly about function and the fact that we were confusing the heck out of Dallas County students. And it wasn't necessarily about efficiencies. And that's what people need to understand, jumping into another question about ASI. ASI isn't necessarily cheaper, right? It's about efficiencies and effectiveness and not necessarily about being cheaper. And it's not necessarily cost cutting. So hopefully that addresses your question, Cristobal. I encourage you when we start doing these listening sessions to propose something like this because it's a consideration. Just like again in Dallas, they got rid of all the vice presidents. And they have vice provosts, they have a vice chancellor of student success, a provost, and I forget the other vice, and an executive vice chancellor. And that person deals with all the administrative services, if you will. And that's it for that level 2. And then they have campus level individual, they have other folks, level 3 at the district level, like associate vice chancellors. But then on the campuses, they have those operational folks who keep the outward facing function going. So, there are just several options and we need to hear ideas. All these ideas are not going to come out of the brain of the chancellor's office and the presidents and the vice presidents. We need to hear from all of you.
Thank you. That actually helps a lot. And I was wondering, do you know if your presentation for the Board of Trustees, will that be open to the public? Because I think it would be good to sit in and have the shared language that they will be aware of to be able to construct proposals like this.
Yes, it's my understanding that the presentation in January about basic accreditation will be a part of the work session. And then the pros and cons will be part of a work session in May. And I don't know if they're planning to vote in May on whether to go this direction, but I do anticipate something in June. So to answer your question, it will be part of the work sessions. And before we do the pro and cons piece, the college or the system district community will have an opportunity. It is planned, Dr. Pan and I have planned to have these listening sessions and discussions so that they are incorporated into the pros and cons. Again, they're not coming out of my head alone or his or Northwest's. It's it's going to be across the board. We've just been asked to be very considerate of the CTC link implementation.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Great transition for Jesse to unmute.
Hey everyone, so I posted a two-part question. Thank you for making this time. I guess one is kind of anecdotally, a small sample size, but from your work with Dallas District's single accreditation, if there was a noted change in staffing levels or expenditures for administrative positions from pre and post. And then the second question that's unrelated in some ways, but kind of curious about what kind of conversations have been going on about how to balance the workload as we go through major systemic changes in our colleges, and knowing that certain position levels and certain people are going to have more ability to carve out time to participate in that, and others are not. And so how to basically navigate through that when there's, 2 to 5 major changes happening at the same time that ideally you can participate in.
Absolutely. No, that you're absolutely right about that. That's why I mentioned earlier, there's just a lot going on, and it's hard to do it all. And we're trying to space it in such a way to where we can get a decent amount of participation. So as an example, with our campus level discussions about the structure of North, we're providing gaps from presentation 2 weeks out and reminding people, here, click on the link, here's the video, share your thoughts. You don't have to do it in the initial session in a chat. We want you to process this information and give us your true thoughts. So it's not going to be rushed, if you will, like this summer process. And keep in mind that summer process was guided by a deadline that we needed to meet for budget. But this deadline, when we're looking at North structure, we have more control over. And so we're spacing it out to make sure there's ample time. And I've already talked to the executive assistants and assistants about, make sure that we're reminding people constantly, remember to do this, remember to take a look at this, do the link, click on the link, share your thoughts, that kind of thing. We have more time now than we did before. And, we're looking, you mentioned Dallas, but the thing is, Dallas is unique in that it was massive. And to be honest with you, yes, they eliminated, they're eliminating about the initial assessment was 350 positions. And it's looking more like 500 to 600 positions. And they cut as I mentioned earlier, the vice presidents of instruction, gone. Vice presidents of student services, gone for the most part. But they in turn created positions such as vice provost, the campuses, the colleges that are now campuses are more focused on, let's say, business and industry, workforce, that kind of thing. They made that decision. The accrediting body didn't tell us to do that. We made that decision. And they're continuing to streamline operations. Also keep in mind that there were many things that had already been confederated: financial aid, the redesign of the student experience, the financial pieces, or that whole CFO piece was already for years had been confederated. So that might not be the best example to look at for us process-wise. Okay, it might be. But then take a look at colleges within Northwest, like the college I worked at in Nevada. It was a college the size of Seattle colleges, and it had 3 main campuses and 9 rural sites. But it had one administration. It had a president, a vice president of instruction, vice president of student affairs, and a vice president of administrative operations, which those last 2, I held both positions at a particular time. And then that entity governed the college. So it was very flat, if you will. And then there were campus deans or campus administrators that manage the individual campuses, which were spread out across the Las Vegas Valley. So again, it's just a matter of what is right for Seattle colleges. And in order to determine that, we really have to look at the data and look at our structure. But either way, more confederation is coming. And if we go single accreditation, then, more streamlining is coming.
So as we look at the time and manage the time, I was going through the chat and realizing that a lot of the last questions really centered district-wide next steps and where the district could sit. I want to let the campus know that we definitely are saving the chat, and the president will send each of these questions up to district. Is there anyone in the chat that maybe has, or on the phone, that has a North Pacific question as we're managing our time? And then Renee.
You know, DeAndre, I want to address real quick the question. There's a comment in the chat about not finding an email from last week about more layoffs, and the chancellor sent out a message. Gosh, I want to say late summer, about the fact that there were many changes that were going to happen in the future. It's my understanding that we're not sending out a district-wide email about layoffs, but as Terrence mentioned, he mentioned it earlier, but we're not reiterating it. But as Terrence mentioned, we are not, as North, sharing names. We're not going to do that because we're trying to be respectful of the individuals who have been impacted. So and I know North is a very close-knit community, but we're going to leave that to the individuals to share with those that they choose to, that they've been affected. It's not appropriate for us to do that because not everyone wants to share that information or isn't ready to share that information. And so we're being respectful of that. DeAndre?
Many thanks. Renee, you have a moment, and then that'll be our last question. And the other questions that are not addressed are really centering district, and that way we're saving the chat so we can be able to address those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we will be passing those on. District related questions, we will pass those on. I have no problem with that.
Hello, Dr. Crawford.
Hi.
Hi, hello, everyone. I think we've heard time and time again that efficiency doesn't mean, budget reduction necessarily. And so I would love, both at the college level and at the district level, maybe I've missed it, but is there measurements or assessments for how we define how efficiency is best serving our students?
Great question. I think that we're at the point now, and I don't know what has happened previously. I think we're at the point now to where we are articulating that. And let me give you an example. One of the charges that the board gave the chancellor was when we to look at what we look like once we're back face to face. And they made it very clear that, we're not returning to the way things used to be. We want to be out there. We want to be moving forward. So how do we do that? Now, we all know that just because we use technology doesn't mean that we're more efficient. We may be more effective, but not necessarily more efficient. Sometimes it's more expensive to do that. And so I personally see that in many ways we have failed, and this is just my opinion, we have failed to outline that or emphasize that in our ASI discussions. And if you take ASI at face value, it's like, oh, we're going to save a bunch of money. And the reality is that that's not necessarily the case. And I don't feel as though we've emphasized that enough. But because of all of your comments and questions, I foresee in the future that there will be more accountability for the use of ASI and evaluating areas that, again, what did I learn when I first came on board? ASI. Before an area is ASI, they're going to look at that more closely. And I'm not saying they haven't. I just see that there hasn't been as much accountability or transparency to answer you all's questions in that regard. And so I think you'll see more of that, but I'm telling you, don't be surprised if you find that it isn't as cost saving as people assume, but it should be better for students and for staff. In other words, our outward facing functions, do students understand us more? Is it easier for a student to fill out the admissions application and the financial aid application and be serviced versus not? Is it easier for them to, be assessed regardless of what campus they want to attend. So I think you're going to see more accountability and explanation, if you will, in that area moving forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. The last couple of questions are centering, like I said, the district. So I don't know if we want to take those times. We're not bound by time, but I do realize we're 20 minutes over. I think Jim just put one in there too. Jim.
Yeah, and I want to ask the question about the timeline, I think, more than anything else for accreditation, because this is an issue that we found between College Council and the Chancellor and the Board of Trustees last year. Is they have a very different idea about how much time it takes to think about, and actually act on feedback. And given the schedule that CTC Link is coming in and that no implementation goes smoothly, the idea that there'll be time to actually get thoughtful, substantive feedback from constituents between CTC Link implementation and maybe May and hopefully June, to me is completely unrealistic. I don't think that we have time to give the information, and they definitely do not have time to take it seriously. And unfortunately, the history of district actually taking what they hear in listening sessions seriously is not good. So I wish I felt better about the process, because I do trust you being part of it, but hearing that timeline, I don't feel better about that process. That sounds incredibly rushed to me.
That's right. So let me tell you, and I agree with you, but let me tell you how this plays out. Initially, Jim, we were supposed to do the pros and cons in April. And the chancellor's like, there's no way we can do this in April. And he went to the board and they're like, okay, push it out to May. So we have no problem saying, trustees, we can't do this in May or June. We need to push it out even more. So this is actually something that we can control. The trustees haven't appeared to be so unreasonable to where they are married to May or married to June. Because the bottom line is this, and our accrediting consultants and our agency made it very clear. If we decide to pull that trigger, if you will, and say, yep, we're going single accreditation, it cannot take more than 2 years. There are models across the country that show that when you stretch it out that far, it gets messy and it doesn't get done, and it leaves a district in chaos. So they're saying, if you're going to do it, get it done in less than 2 years. If you can't get it done in less than 2 years, 2 years max, you need to rethink. So just know that if that deadline needs to move, the chancellor has no problem, because he's already gotten an extension. He has no problem going back to the board and saying, this is rushed. We can't get it done at this particular point. So that is something we have some control over. Thank goodness. Because you're right, we don't know what to expect from CTC Link. I know y'all are working really hard, but when we push the button, things will happen. And we need to make sure we have time to fix those things. So thank you for that comment. Absolutely.
Thank you. And that's the last comment. We'll stay on. If there's any questions centering North, please address them in the chat as North. And if there's any questions you would like for us to address with district, please address them with district. Thank you, President. That's all the questions thus far.
Okay. There's something else popping up in the chat. So I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank you all for participating in this process. I want to thank the executive team for hanging in there with process. I know this has been different for North, but I really feel good about the way we have approached this challenge. And it has been a challenge, there's no question. I hope you all know that you can share your input, questions, or concerns with any of us. We're not taking this personally. We're just trying to get it right and make sure that we can serve the students, that North can remain viable, and that we can, in all of this, take steps forward and keep moving toward the future, and just be progressive. I mean, it's hard in all that we're doing right now. It seems like that's not possible, but we can, because we've got a lot of creativity. That's one thing I've learned since June. We have a lot of creativity in this college community. and we're going to tap into it. So feel free to share and keep attending these meetings and watching these recordings and giving us feedback. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Be safe. Take care.